Last weekend, a member of the Iranian parliament, Hamad Ardestani, raised international concerns when he was quoted as saying, quote, "In my opinion, we have achieved nuclear weapons, but we do not announce it. It means our policy is to possess nuclear bombs, but our declared policy is currently within the framework of the JCPOA," end quote. The JCPOA is the abbreviated title of the Iran nuclear deal, which the Trump administration pulled the United States out of, and the Biden administration has been repeatedly trying to resurrect. Well, on Monday, a spokesman for the State Department, Patel, responded with this.
President Biden, Secretary Blinken will not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon, period. We continue to assess, though, that Iran is not currently undertaking the key activities that would be necessary to produce a testable nuclear device. And we don't believe that the Supreme Leader has yet made a decision to resume the weaponization program that we judge Iran suspended or stopped at the end of 2003.
Is America naive or what? Joining me now to discuss this is noted geopolitical commentator Erick Stakelbeck, who has spent nearly 2 decades covering the Middle East and national security issues in depth and has traveled to the region multiple times interviewing world leaders and wanted terrorists, highlighting threats to the United States and Israel. He's the host of the Israel and Middle East focused newscast, The Watchman, and he's the author of 3 best-selling books, including ISIS Exposed. Erick, welcome to Washington Watch. Great to see you.
Great to see you, Tony. Thanks for having me.
So let me get your take, the accuracy of this member of the Iranian parliament. Is he just blowing smoke, or is there something here?
You know, Tony, he's not in the inner sanctum, so to speak, of the Iranian regime that we know of, close to the Supreme Leader Khamenei. They would make the ultimate decision there. The Supreme Leader and the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. That's the vanguard of the regime. And you would also think that, look, if Iran actually had the bomb, we know they're working towards it despite what the State Department says, that Israel would know. You would think U.S. intelligence would know, but especially Israel. Tony, Israel has carried out many operations inside Iran on Iranian soil over the past several years, eliminating Iranian nuclear scientists. So you would think if it was at that stage that Israel would have already stepped in. I believe that Israel, before Iran is able to actually have that nuclear capability, Israel will act. Can't say I'd be completely shocked if Iran announced we do have the bomb, but I would think that Israel has so closely monitored this, Tony, over the years, that Israel would act before it got to that point.
Erick, I tend to agree with that assessment in terms of Israel acting. I was in Israel about a month and a half ago and met with the Prime Minister. This was before Iran attacked Israel. Were you surprised that, as far as I know, that Israel did not strike at the nuclear facilities when they struck back at Iran?
I was a bit surprised, Tony, not specifically the nuclear facilities, although, look, if Israel wanted to do it, that was a golden opportunity of sorts in that, look, Iran launched an unprecedented attack from Iranian soil against Israel, over 300 projectiles, Tony, launched, and miraculously, I don't say that word lightly, 99% intercepted, and yet Israel's response, I believed at the time, I thought would be overwhelming, to send a message to Iran, hey, don't ever do it again. We didn't get that. We got a very limited Israeli response. And Tony, I believe the main reason for that is the Biden administration. Israel has essentially been facing off against Iran and its proxies like Hezbollah, like Hamas, with one arm tied behind its back. Israel's been fighting a war against Hamas like that. And the Biden administration tried everything it could to completely restrain Israel from even responding to this unprecedented Iranian attack.
Yeah, I was surprised. I thought for certain that this would be the opening for them to do that, given that after they had been this unprecedented direct attack on them, in their response, they could take care of business. So I was surprised by that. I do agree, again, with your assessment. But let me ask you about that, Erick. Is the Biden administration's restraining of Israel and their ability to defend themselves eliminate Hamas, which is actually the least of the threats to them, but it is, I think, more of a probing action, and it's determining the weakness, determination, where the United States is going to stand. I think America is making the situation more volatile in the Middle East by not standing resolutely with Israel. Am I on track?
Tony, I agree with you 100%. You know, it's said that weak men create hard times. And right now we have weakness in Washington, D.C. and in the White House, quite frankly. Not only that, across European capitals as well. And the Iranian regime and its allies are quite literally watching the conduct, the posture of the Biden administration towards Israel, and they're taking notes. And they're salivating at the thought, Tony, of daylight between the United States and Israel. Now, the Biden White House will say, well, hey, there is no daylight. Just look at what happened. We helped Israel intercept those projectiles coming from Iran. We've got Israel's back. And yet, last week, Joe Biden goes on international television and says, you know what? We're going to withhold arms shipments to Israel. We completely disagree with Israel's potential campaign in Rafah, which would finish the job of crushing Hamas. Tony, the world is watching that. And in the Middle East, especially, optics are everything. And the insinuation or the impression that the U.S. is distancing itself from Israel, the likes of Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, they're watching very, very closely. And they're saying, hey, if we up the ante and we strike Israel continuously and at a larger degree, it doesn't seem like the United States has any stomach to intervene. That's the message that's being transmitted. And when the U.S. doesn't lead and act as a leader of the free world, the world devolves into chaos, and we're seeing that right now in real time.
Eric, I'm concerned that it could be more than ineptitude. It could be intentional. I understand that Israel had committed not to use these 2,000-pound bombs in Rafah, which were being withheld. I mean, you can have agreements with friends and allies. Say, all right, we're going to release all of this because we know you need it for defense purposes, but we don't want you using it here. I mean, you should be able to have that kind of relationship rather than signaling, as you just pointed out, the daylight that would be between us. I think, and you know this region much better than I do, but I think this is putting, kind of pushing Israel into a corner. They have to defend themselves. And I think this is going to make them, you know, they're very steady. I trained with IDF when I was in the Marine Corps and coming out working in anti-terrorism. I've worked with them. They're the best. But when you have experienced what they experienced on October the 7th, and you see the world turning away from you, the rise of anti-Semitism, I'm just saying, I see this as a very volatile situation, a powder keg.
Tony, you're absolutely right. It is an existential struggle that Israel is locked in right now. It can't. This is a 1939 moment. I do not exaggerate. Between the gathering storm of adversaries like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, all coming together, between the rise of, the explosion of anti-Semitism, including right here in the United States, in a massive way. This is a no more precarious moment, I think, Tony, since World War II. That is where we're at. And by the way, Israel's enemies and America's enemies are one in the same. Right. Israel is really acting as the first line of defense for Western civilization. So this would be a time, to me, for the West to get together alongside Israel, a like-minded nation, and to get together and to form an alliance. We have NATO, of course, but NATO very toothless, as we've seen over the past few years in many ways. So let's get serious as a civilization, as Judeo-Christian civilization, in confronting these gathering threats. If we don't, things will get worse. And right now, there's a complete leadership vacuum. Perhaps that will change in November here in the United States, at least.
So, Eric, we've talked about kind of the geopolitical landscape, the national defense, military issues. Let's talk, how do we look at this from a biblical perspective as Christians, as Bible-believing Christians? What are we to make of what's unfolding?
That's the key, I think, Tony. At the end of the day, this is a spiritual battle, no doubt. And look, there are better political choices than others, clearly. but there's not a political solution here, I don't believe. There's a leadership would help, no doubt, strong, bold, visionary leadership, but this is a spiritual battle, and I believe prophetically, look, we see prophetic chess pieces moving on the board. Just yesterday, Tony, Israel celebrated its 76th birthday. It was Israel's Independence Day. I believe that when Israel was miraculously reborn in 1948, it sent the prophetic time clock into overdrive. So I don't think as believers we can be shocked at what we see unfolding right now. Evil men are going to do what they do, and the Bible is very clear about that. It's clear that things will get tough for Israel, for the world, but also very clear that God Almighty still sits on the throne and he's in control. And for followers of Jesus right now, for the church, Tony, I believe this can be our finest hour. We can step up and fulfill our biblical mandate to be salt and light, to be ambassadors for Christ, and to lead the way, to shine light in the darkness. That's how I see it spiritually right now. As discouraging as it can be, as believers, hey, let's not have a spirit of fear, but of power and love and of a sound mind.
Isn't this a tremendous opportunity, Eric, as well, with the rest of the world turning away from Israel, the rise of anti-Semitism, for us to step in and show support for our big brother, if you will? I mean, we would not have the Christian faith if it were not for the Jewish people. Our Messiah is Jewish. And isn't this an opportunity to speak to them boldly and clearly that we love them because the love of God that is within us? And when everyone else runs away, we're going to run to them and we're going to stand with them.
Tony, you said it. That is the key. Right now, it's very easy to abandon Israel and abandon the Jewish people. It's not very popular right now to be a Jew or an Israeli. And by the way, for people to consider this, Tony, out of the world's 8 billion plus people, only 15.7 million, that's it, are Jews. This tiny, minuscule people group and their tiny, minuscule nation, the size of the state of New Jersey, according to the growing legions of anti-Semites, are responsible somehow for all of the world's problems. I think as believers, as Christians, this is, Tony, you said it, this is time, because look, the Jewish people could use a few good friends right now. And a reminder, these are God's people. That's God's land. Our Messiah, the Lord Jesus, is Jewish. So right now, if we don't do it, Tony, real simple, no one else is going to do it.
Well, those facts that you just pointed out, the fact they're less than 1% of the world's population, the fact that entire country is the size of New Jersey, but yet it occupies the focus of the world and tells us there's something more to this than meets the eye, and you cannot see it unless you look at it with spiritual eyes.
Yeah, Tony, very true. It's spiritual. At the end of the day, there's something about this people and this nation. There always has been. This has been going on for thousands of years. Anti-Semitism is the world's oldest hatred. Many nations and empires have come against Israel and the Jewish people. Thankfully, Tony, they've all ended up in the ash heap of history, while Israel, against all odds, completely improbable, continues to survive and thrive. Only God.
Yes, and so I want to stand with God, and I'm going to stand with Israel. I think that's the safest place to be. Erick Stakelbeck, I want to thank you for joining us. Great insight. Appreciate your ministry greatly.
Thanks, Tony. God bless. Appreciate it.